E36 versus E46. Welcome back to another video, everybody. This is the J Speed Racing YouTube channel. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the like button to help a lot more people find this video and the channel. Today we're going to talk about an E36 and an E46. Which one makes the better daily driver? Which one makes the better project? If you haven't already, make sure to follow me on Instagram. Link down in the description as well. Let's get into it, guys. E36s. What are the pros of an E36? First off, I absolutely love the looks of these cars. They look so good in my opinion. They're just so timeless and classic kind of at the same time. It really just looks fantastic. That's something I love about them. I've had a bunch of E36s and they all look fantastic. Second off, there's so many aftermarket parts available for these cars. The popularity has just skyrocketed these past few years. So many more companies are offering parts for these cars. It is absolutely fantastic. I love to see that grow. Thirdly, these cars are decently reliable. BMW is known for their inline-6 engine, and man, they put a good one in this car. It might not be the fastest inline-6 in the world, however, they go for so many miles, and they're such good engines. One thing I love about E36s is how cheap they are. They're getting a little bit more expensive, however, parts are still really inexpensive. You go to eBay, Amazon, Junkyard, wherever it may be, so many parts available, so many good parts for cheap, so you can kind of stay on a budget if you need. The value of these E36s is great. You get a nice leather interior. The dash isn't going to crack. However, we're going to move into some cons for the E36 that I've kind of come across with my experiences with them. Firstly, the interior. Sadly enough, the interior does fall apart over time. The headliner sags, the seats crack, the door panels, you have no chance rescuing these door panels once they fall off. They're absolutely junk. So that's one bad thing about the E36. Interior needs some work. Another thing that I know is a common problem is the chassis. Some of the chassis tear out where the shocks mount to the chassis. Some of that light sheet metal will kind of get thin and will pull through either with rust or just a lot of driving. And the rear subframes do end up cracking where it mounts to the chassis. It's also a bit harder to find clean E36s. They're almost getting to the point where it's almost a 240SX where they're getting so banged up and so beat up and so old that it's hard to find clean ones. So whenever you do find a clean one, it's going to be nice and expensive. However, hopefully it's going to be maintained well enough. It's 2022, guys. These cars are getting a little bit older. We cannot deny that. So the rubber lines, the plastic hoses, all that stuff is going to have to be replaced because of the age on these things. So that's something to keep in mind. It's going to need a little bit more work up front to get it where it needs to be. However, I just love an E36. It's such a great car in my opinion. With that being said, guys, let's move on to an E46, the successor to the E36. I've had a few E46s. I must say I do love them so much. They're a great car. First off, being that they're a little bit newer than an E36, so you have a little bit more time until those rubber hoses crack or whatnot. So it needs maybe a little bit less work up front. Another pro is that they're plentiful. You look around on the streets, you see so many E46s compared to E36s. That's because they're a little newer. They're at that budget point where they've come down to the bottom of their price range, and so many people are just picking them up left and right, doing what they need to do to them. And that's something I love about them, that they're absolutely everywhere and they're super cheap. Number 3, the interior is so much better than an E36. They've redone a bunch of it. The door panels still aren't perfect. However, you can at least close the door without having a heart attack that you're going to rip those clips out. The interior is a lot better. Headliners still do sag. They are getting a little bit older. However, for a daily, that's probably something you want to put an eye on, is how nice the interior is and how well it's going to hold up over time. Number 4, aftermarket support is still absolutely fantastic for these E46s. That's something you want to look at whenever you want to buy a daily or a project, is how many companies offer parts for your car. You know, if you need something or if you want to do a mod, you want to make sure those parts are out there. And lastly, for the pros for an E46 is that they're so cheap. Like I said, they're at the bottom of their price range. You go on Facebook Marketplace, they're $2 to $3 grand for, $325. You're not going to get an M3 for that money, but if you want to get into an E46 for cheap, that's probably the price range you want to get into. Maybe 2, 3, 4 grand, a nice little clean 325. Moving into the con list for the E46, number 1 is the chassis tears. Yes, it still has issues like the E36 with some of that chassis pulling out of where the shocks mount to the chassis, along with the rear subframe where that mounts to the chassis as well. The chassis will end up cracking and kind of pulling out, which is a big no-no, especially in rust areas where you get a lot of snow. You definitely want to keep an eye out for that. Also, the oil pump nut on the engines tend to back out. That's also a little bit of an E36 problem, but I do know an E46s have that issue a lot. So that's something else you kind of want to either cross your fingers or address early on. There are a few more electronics in an E46. They added systems to the engines and the interior, so that's more electronics to kind of go wrong over time. So that's something you want to keep an eye out for, make sure everything's in working order, and maybe that's something you can address if you need. And lastly, just like every BMW, guys, oil and vacuum leaks. That is something that you cannot escape no matter what car you buy. As long as it's a BMW, you're going to leak some oil and you're going to have a vacuum leak. So you got to keep that in mind. If you're getting an E46, make sure you look over like the CCV, PCV system, and the oil pan, the oil filter housing gasket. I could go on for days about that, but this is not a video on that. This is a pros and cons list of an E36 versus E46. Which one makes the best daily driver / project car? My final opinion, I love an E36. However, that would be my selection for a project car. If I was to buy a daily driver right now, it would be an E46 because it's newer, it's more together, there's Plentiful, they're not all beat to piss yet, and you can still get your hands on a nice clean one for a cheap price. An E36, in my opinion, would be the perfect project car. If you wanted to buy a daily weekend car that you just want to tinker with here and there, E36 is definitely the route to go. If you're on a budget, both of these cars are still budget friendly. However, an E36 would be fantastic for a cheap little budget project car if you can find one in that price range right now. I know the prices of these cars are a little bit high right now. Be patient, guys. Keep your eyes out for a perfect one if you're in the market for an E36 or 46. Let me know down in the comments, guys, which car do you prefer, E36 or 46, and what are some pros and cons that you've encountered in your ownership of one. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, leave some comments down below what video you want to see next. I got a few kind of in the queue waiting, so I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.
That's a deal, right? That's a deal, right? That's a bet, right? That's a deal, right? That's a deal, right? Hey, coming down like precipitation. I ain't never met a limitation.